Ah, the Victorian era, a time when corsets were tighter than a good suspense novel and societal rules were as rigid as a freshly starched cravat. Today, dear listener, we embark on an enchanting voyage through the whims and woes of Victorian womanhood, a dreamy yet disciplined realm where women stepped in time with a tango of tradition while mastering the art of the proper curtsy. Our tale begins in the parlour, the very heart of the Victorian household, pulsing with the vitality of afternoons dedicated to embroidery and the noble pursuit of becoming the host or guest of the perfect tea service. Picture it now, the delicate clink of fine china, the aroma of freshly brewed Darjeeling infusing the air, and faint echoes of piano keys tinkering somewhere in the background, all part of the ballet of daily life for Victorian women. In such rooms, Victorian ladies were expected to develop the delicate skill of conversing fluently in small talk, an art form akin to threading a needle, blindfolded while riding a unicycle. They practiced speaking in perfectly modulated tones, never too loud, lest their voices disrupt the genteel harmony of the space. Oh, and laughter. More an elegant titter than a belly laugh. We wouldn't want to knock the monocle off Uncle Herbert's trembling face, now would we? Fashion, of course, was no mere afterthought. It was a dance performed with laces and boning, a choreography of fabrics that rendered women both walking art pieces and masters of endurance. From the moment a young lady slipped into her day dress, the rules of fashion dictated much about her social standing and virtue. The ritual of getting dressed was nothing short of an athletic event, requiring the help of a lady's maid, several willing neighbours, and possibly a small energetic dog to nibble off any errant thread. You see, Victorian women were adept at the social and sartorial spy games required to communicate status without uttering a single syllable. Those adept, with fans, could even signal their interest or disinterest in a suitor with a mere flick of the wrist, the precursor, I'm sure, to today's like and unfollow buttons. As the sun set, these intrepid heroines of civility would gather amidst candlelight for the dinner party, a critical play in the social chess game where not only the taste of the beef was judged, but one's adeptness at witty banter and skillful silences. The evening's conversation might meander through art, literature, or the latest telegram scandal, but always with forethought to neither provoke a political kerfuffle nor bring on Aunt Mildred's attack of the vapours. Ah, how the Victorians loved their traditions, almost as much as they loved a well-formed bonnet. Each day, women navigated an intricate web of societal expectations with grace and humour, managing to thrive within the garment trade-off. Liberty traded for lace, independence for intricate etiquette. And so, dear sleeper, as your eyelids droop and you slip lightly away on a cloud of imagined teaspoons, perhaps you'll find comfort in the thought that although the Victorian woman lived in a world tightly corseted by rules, she also danced defiantly on the edges, sewing creativity into every stitch of her constrained tapestries. If these stories help you drift off, please subscribe to the channel. It would mean the world to me. And before you fully fade into dreamland, I would love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. As we bid adieu to today's tales from the parlour and beyond, cast your mind forward through the misty time travel haze, where more whalebone-backed adventures on the confines and charms of this bewildering yet oddly beautiful era await us. Ah, the Victorian era, a time of grandeur and a bounty of rules that, quite frankly, make one wonder if the Victorians ever had any time left for fun amidst their regimen of restrictions. Picture this. A bustling, foggy London morning. Your corset, laced tighter than a detective novel plot, suffocating from both societal expectations and that one extra scone you shouldn't have had at afternoon tea. Today, my dear listener, we embark on a gentle meander through the surprisingly rigorous world of Victorian fashion protocols, the sartorial strictures that ensured you weren't only dressed to the nines, but possibly to the 10s, 11s, and even 12s, given a good tailor. Victorian women were not ones to don casual attire with abandonment. Oh no. Mornings began with a delightful assembly of garments guaranteed to confuse even the most adept of modern escape artists. The layering started with the chemise, a loose-fitting garment that was as modest as a heroine in a Jane Austen novel and functioned as the bedrock upon which the rest of the day's attire would be constructed, like the foundation of an elaborate, inescapable, sartorial prison. Over this went a corset, the formidable piece of engineering designed to make fainting, from lack of breath, a distinct possibility, a Victorian woman's version of cardio, if you will. It's no wonder society ladies were known to retire to their fainting sofas, where they might ponder the existential dilemma of fashion versus oxygen. And as if corsetry weren't thrilling enough, the whole ensemble was cinched with a crinoline, that wondrous, whalebone cage that allowed one's skirts to swish elegantly from side to side, perfect for a game of paving stone hopscotch, or for taking up too much room in any horse-drawn carriage. Another layer or three would follow, including petticoats and bustles, ensuring the woman could not only never be late to a dinner party, but also possibly block the doorway should she arrive too early. The day's dressing, my friends, did not cease at the waist. Oh, to be so simple. No, the arms were next, bound in sleeves that seemed to grow progressively puffier with every passing decade of the Victorian era, as if to combat the logic-defying slenderness of the waistline. Atop it all went the lavish gowns, heavy with yards of fabric adorned with flounces, frills and lace. The broader the skirt, the more imperious the wearer, as if announcing to the world, "Here I come, ready to two-step my way across the marble floors and, heaven forbid, accidentally knock over a vase." The cherry on this elaborate sundae of style was the accessory regime. Gloves were essential, never to be removed, lest one wish to scandalize the neighbors with the public airing of scandalously bare knuckles. The color and length of these gloves were dictated not just by fashion, but by the solemn hour the clock struck. Daylight hours called for different hues than those sultry evening affairs. One never wore evening gloves to a breakfast, unless truly rebelling against the constraints of time itself. Now, you may be thinking, with all these layers, how did these women move, or breathe, or sit? Quite simply, with difficulty and decorum. Women were required to conduct themselves with such poise that they made ballerinas look positively clumsy. Each movement was a dance, a carefully choreographed ballet within the confines of fabric, ensuring a seat taken looked like an elegant glide and not a crash landing into yards of taffeta. As the day drifted into evening, so did the attire transform. Evening gowns swept in with lower necklines and richer colors. Much of the adornment lay within a well-placed brooch or a statement choker, whispering of elegance and suggesting whispers of the latest Gothic romance. A tinge of mystery, if you like. And as such layers peeled away at day's end, it was time to retire. Not to a mere bed, but to a nest of pillows and dreams, layered as intricately as a day's apparel, embroidered with dreams of another lap around the merry-go-round of Victorian social life. Our musings will gently float onward through this delightful maze of manners, but for now rest in the quietude of knowing. Tomorrow brings its own delicate chapter, woven especially for you in this fabric of time. In the rose-tinted realm of the Victorian era, a time best imagined through the sepia-toned filter of a dreary London afternoon, women led lives strung together by layers of lace and social obligations. These decorative binds, you see, were just as delicate and intricate as the doilies they were constantly embroidering. Now, let us gently tiptoe into the world of fashion, a subject so delightfully complex it might just cause spontaneous yawning. Picture, if you will, the Victorian woman preparing to leave her cozy abode. She couldn't simply throw on yesterday's frock. No, sir. Her wardrobe was a maze of moral intricacies and unspoken rules. From the foundational layer, the chemise, soft and seemingly innocent, shielding her buttery skin, to the petticoats that ballooned more with every decade, resembling a tiny mountain range complete with snowy peaks of lace. Oh, the endless quest to achieve. The much-coveted hourglass figure, presumably to measure the sand slipping through the hourglass of societal patience. Then there was the corset, the garment responsible for turning youthful torsos into neatly packaged bundles of decorum, albeit at the expense of lung capacity. One might argue it was not wholly unlike being dressed by a boa constrictor, chic yet suffocating. An arsenal of whalebone and fabric, the corset was laced so tightly it could cinch away any thought of rebellion, leaving only a firm reminder to breathe in character-laden wheezes. Headwear was another battlefield of conformity, embodying a rather literal crowning glory. Befittingly dubbed bonnet o'clock, this whimsical headpiece sat perched on the head like a bird's intricate nest, its ribbons cascading down like twin waterfalls of propriety tied firmly beneath the chin, ensuring no stray thought of rebellion escaped. In some circles, appearance and deportment became so much an art form, they threatened to blur the lines between fashion and furniture. Moving beyond sartorial splendor, Victorian ladies were expected to reveal not just their couture sensibilities, but also decorum in the culinary arena. An afternoon tea, an event so crucial it might as well have been patented, required an etiquette toolkit akin to a lion tamer's. It involved deft manipulation of porcelain vessels, delicate cups that threatened to break with a mere miscalculated sigh. The pouring of tea itself was a rite, a subtle ballet requiring the grace of a swan and the precision of a Swiss watch. And heaven forbid a crumb slipped its way onto brocade-covered laps during this performance, as feeding oneself was an act to be executed with genteel parsimony. Indeed, Victorian dining necessitated more than mere nourishment. It demanded choreography designed to showcase restraint and daintiness. One sip, one bite, and one perfectly timed nod at a time. Behind the genteel mask lay layers of obligation, rules for social engagements as labyrinthine as a Dickensian plot twist. Ladies were caught in a waltz of visits and calling cards, where showing up mattered almost as much as elegantly taking your leave, all while managing to secure your reputation as outstandingly proper, like a human potion of chamomile. Time spent visiting symbolized social currency, an opportunity to listen appreciatively as the droning hum of long-winded conversations on weather swept over like a gentle soporific lullaby. After carefully navigating these societal ripples, women were expected to wield musical instruments with the poise of a dolphin, navigating a ripple of a more melodic kind. Mastery of the piano drew applause more for its reflection on one's social graces than the melody itself. One imagines that after such performances, nodding with satisfaction, mothers would have felt the same contentment as orchestrating a symphony of manners. As the embers of the fireplace settled into a comforting glow, our peek into the Victorian woman's life begins to fade, much like the sun sinking behind gaslit rooftops. Close your eyes and imagine the whisper of a silken train following her down dimly lit corridors. Beyond those walls, new curiosities patiently await, ready to reveal their own sleepy secrets. As the golden afternoon sun filtered gently through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the parlor floor, our story meanders into the delicate realm of Victorian etiquette, a veritable maze of courteous customs and curious conventions. Imagine, if you will, a scene reminiscent of a Jane Austen novel, but with less ballroom elegance and more of a firm grip on one's teacup. Begin this chapter by settling yourself into a cozy chair, perhaps with a cup of chamomile tea in hand, as we delve into the curious world of calling cards, a staple of social interaction in the Victorian era. Picture the Victorian woman, corseted into a S-shaped silhouette, with a parasol at the ready to ward off any unwanted sunbeam that dared to threaten her prized pallor. Alas, a tan was as scandalous as not knowing which fork to use for the fish course. Now, the calling card. To you, it might seem like a simple piece of cardstock, but in this world, it was a golden ticket to social acceptance. Leaving your card at a colleague or friend's home was the 19th century equivalent of sending an unread message on WhatsApp. Acknowledgement was expected, but not too eagerly. Once admitted into the hallowed hall of the at-home visit, the Victorian woman needed to deploy conversational skills as one might deploy an arsenal of troops. Strategy was key. Topics were highly curated: weather, the new opera, or the mysterious and never-ending knitting project were safe. Opinions on politics, or God forbid, someone's personal circumstances, were the conversational equivalents of suggesting a game of dodgeball with Fabergé eggs. Amidst these interactions, one must not forget the crucial art of the curtsy, a simple dip indicating, "I acknowledge your importance and will not question your questionable taste in drapery." The depth of one's curtsy was directly correlated with several things: the social standing of the recipient, the size of one's hoop skirt, and the likelihood of regaining vertical composure without incident. Entire evenings could be scored not by musical accompaniment, but by the rise and fall of bustled acquaintances. Also of note was the art of letter writing, an epidemiology of polite society. A Victorian woman needed her prose to be as tightly bound as the ribbons on her bonnet. Letters were written with beautiful penmanship, and often of such astonishing length that one was left wondering if the Victorian period experienced a shortage of ink due to the sheer volume of correspondence. Yet, amid all these rules and fusty dictates of the era, there lay an undeniable charm. A gentleman required permission to even address a lady at a ball, a protocol that, surprisingly, stops many a scandal before it can start. The most audacious thing a Victorian woman might do was to be seen without chaperone, possibly resulting in the kind of reputation you wouldn't even gossip about at a sewing circle. The Victorians excelled in crafting an ideal of domestic life to which few could fully adhere. The results? A world where the absurd becomes routine, and where the simple joy of an afternoon tea was elevated to an event of ceremonial grandeur. And nestled comfortably in the delicate contradictions of such expectations, Victorian women discovered an artful way to express themselves, albeit in bonnets and print muslin. It's time now to draw the curtains on this picturesque setting. The lace, as ever, catches the fading sunlight just so, whispering that perhaps in our next encounter, as dreams fold over the consciousness like a beloved quilt, we'll unfurl more stories where tradition tangles playfully with antiquated forms of flirtation. And as you slip further into the depths of slumber, remember, even in ordinary intricacies, history warms the soul like a whispered bedtime tale. Imagine, if you will, you're drifting through a serene Victorian garden. A soft breeze gently rustles the leaves of every prim and proper shrub, carefully planted in rambunctiously straight lines by an overzealous gardener, perhaps named Nigel. Each bush, of course, wears a modest coat of dew, akin to the very decorum expected of the women who ambled along these strolled paths. Here, within the confines of ornate wrought-iron gates, were entwined with the daily life of a Victorian woman, where within each corset lies a tale of both rigid protocols and quiet rebellion. Our journey takes us through a most curious phenomenon, the art of Victorian social calls. Oh yes, my dear listeners, imagine a world without smartphones or video calls. Instead, the Victorians had the delightful ordeal of physically visiting each other's drawing rooms, rituals so regimented it could put a military parade to shame. Visiting hours were dictated like clockwork, starting at 4 in the afternoon and concluding just as proper ladies began contemplating their evening reticules. Picture yourself as Emily, a genteel lady with expectations as high as her hat is wide, meticulously orchestrating her week around these calls. It is essential to arrive neither too early. Good gracious, you don't want to catch your host in the unladylike act of yawning at the day, nor too late to appear that you've spent all afternoon concocting scandalous gossip over the tea kettle. Speaking of tea, it flowed like gossip through these visits. An improperly brewed pot could very well ruin one's social standing quicker than a misplaced petticoat. Legend holds that some tea leaves could even predict the future, a tradition that also predicted the fortunate escape of many gentlemen from these oh-so-charming gatherings. The intricacies did not end there. The length of your stay was a precise dance, revolving around conversations, polite to the point of inducing light slumber. Emily, like her contemporaries, had mastered the art of subtly hinting her departure just as soon as the biscuit plate presented itself empty one too many times. And heaven forbid one discuss anything more riveting than the weather or perhaps the merits of the latest bonnet styles. As shadows lengthened and the charm of conversation dimmed like a lingering summer twilight, it was essential to leave behind the calling card, a small rectangular piece defining your existence as surely as its crisp edges. These calling cards were the social media handles of an era, each one illustrating a network, a connection, and an excuse for future biscuits. During these interactions, the noble pursuit of decorum dictated everything, including fashion. Imagine, if you will, the epic challenge of balancing your bonnet with the complexity of pinpointing the precise length your skirts ought to trail across embroidered carpets. Not too long to imply carelessness, nor too short to suggest impropriety. Indeed, skirts were the very pendulum of social timekeeping. In this world, where lace was its own kind of poetry, women's laughter was often best carried in whispers and giggles that lingered like fireflies at dusk. A Victorian lady, bound by etiquette as snugly as by her corset, knew her role was mostly to listen, smile, nod appropriately, and of course, provide the proper gasp at the revelation of yet another perfectly scandalous dance card mix-up from the last season. And so, as the last echoes of booted footsteps and carriage wheels faded into the cobblestones, Emily, along with other ladies, would find solace in the liberating task of untying bonnets and releasing hairpins, a quiet rebellion carried out as softly as the waning light of day. So, dear listener, as we saunter along our path of history, indulging in little pauses of laughter and wonderment, breathe deeply, let your mind wander gently, and prepare as we tiptoe over the next threshold into the realm of Victorian whimsy and wisdom. In an era where corsets were as essential as umbrellas in a rainy London, Victorian women faced a set of social codes so intricate that even deciphering the most challenging Sudoku would seem like child's play. Imagine a world where the rustle of a silk petticoat could spark an impromptu debate on the propriety of pettiskirts in public, and you might just scratch the surface of the Victorian social labyrinth. At the center of this taffeta-tangled universe was the omnipresent calling card. Not simply a name on a slip of paper, these cards were like the social media profiles of the era, minus the selfies and cute cat videos, of course. The ritual of exchanging these cards could rival the complexity of a courtly waltz. It became an art form of its own, the art of saying, "I visited," without actually having to endure the awkwardness of small, "See, talk." No high society gathering was complete without this elegant dance of exchanging cards, which, if executed correctly, might even lead to a grand invitation to tea, or shall we say, the Instagram stories of yesteryear. To add to the excitement, Victorian women mastered the art of the at-home day. This was a sort of scheduled social appearance where one remained stylishly reclined on a plush settee in an impeccably arranged drawing room, ready to receive guests between the acceptable hours of 3 and 5. During these social engagements, one might engage in delicate conversation, careful to avoid any heated discussions or exertion that might cause an unseemly outburst of perspiration. For you see, in the Victorian lexicon, underarm sweat was considered the very epitome of unladylike behavior. Speaking of unflattering behaviors, the enigma of female attire was nothing short of a Houdini act. The rules around clothing were so specific that it makes the modern-day fashion police seem like a disorganized group of colorblind hobbyists, with society decreeing that women must change outfits multiple times a day. Breakfast dress, walking dress, afternoon tea dress, dinner dress, evening ball gown. It was a sartorial relay race, if ever there was one. Why? One wrong outfit at the wrong time of day, and you ran the risk of being shunned from the annual charity ball faster than you could say, "Excuse my petticoat." And let us not overlook the subtle curtsy, a gesture that served as both a greeting and a social litmus test. A mere dip of the knees was not enough. It required poise, elegance, and the ability to descend without the unfortunate accompaniment of a cracking knee. This delicate performance was a silent yet powerful statement, one that communicated respect, social status, and flexibility. both physical and social. Women practiced their curtsies with as much dedication as preparing for an Olympic event, striving to achieve that slight or bend in the knee that could win not just universal admiration, but also a potential suitor's favor. In all this, one simple truth prevailed: the ability to seamlessly navigate these intricate social hurdles while maintaining the grace and poise of a swan gliding across a moonlit pond was an unspoken yet fundamental measure of a Victorian woman's worth. And so, as the gentle chime of a distant clock reminds us that its ticking will take us forward in time, we see these women move through their days like well-oiled machines of etiquette, yet always under the watchful eyes of society's unforgiving gaze. One can only wonder what further rituals would unfold in this ever-so-complicated dance of propriety as we drift into the next realm of Victorian curiosities. With this thought gently tucked away, like an unsecured bonnet in a summer breeze, our path unfurls to the next topic, where Victorian elegance and eccentricity dance a merry waltz to the tune of another peculiar tradition. But for now, let the sound of crinoline fade softly into the background as we close our eyes and step forward, ever so softly, into the eve of our next historical revelation. In the dim glow of a Victorian morning, as the sun peeked shyly over the cobbled streets, an extraordinary scene unfolded. A parade of petticoats and crinolines, lace gloves and parasols, a ballet of sorts, where the dancers were neither on stage nor quite voluntary. For the women of the era, departing the confines of their homes was less a casual stroll and more a grand production requiring a hefty cast and a rigorous rehearsal. One might imagine those bustling streets bustling even more with whispered updates on who had managed to perfect the elusive art known as marrying below one's station, a delightful gossip over tea-time scones. Victorian women, you see, had rules to follow, an intricate web of do's and don'ts woven tighter than any seamstress could manage. Chief among these was the mammoth task of ensuring one's demeanor was as impeccable as their headdress. Displaying emotion, particularly of the fiery or boisterous variety, was a no-no equivalent to serving lukewarm Earl Grey. A proper lady must match her emotional spectrum with her wallpaper, neutral, unassuming, and void of sudden outbreaks of personality. The irony was not lost on most, as even the plumpest of cats could demonstrate greater liberty while napping on one's well-polished hearth. Next on this checklist was the daunting practice of stay-breathing. Corsets, the fabric epitome of a firm handshake, offered assistance in achieving that coveted hourglass figure, only at the expense of one's lung capacity. In a world without Twitter to provide updates, gossip had to be relayed in breathless whispers, an apt skill honed by said corsetry. But don't fret, if swooning occurred, it was less a breach of etiquette and more an opportunity for gallant gentlemen to partake in their century-old pastime of heroically flapping hats before one's fainted visage. Walking, a deceptively simple activity, required its own rulebook. Ladies were to tread lightly, gliding gracefully as if floating upon clouds, ensuring never to outpace male companions for fear of being seen as over-enthusiastic about locomotion. Today, stepping in a puddle may result in wet ankles and grumbled expletives, but history tragically lacks tales of sodden petticoats, leaving us to assume Victorian streets were blissfully dry, or such mishaps were politely swept under the rug. Further complicating this dance was the ever-watchful eye of society judging the merits of one's small talk. Conversational topics paralleled the Victorian palette, everything steamed and without surprise. Discussions of fashion were robust, naturally, as clothing represented not just style but social armor. The more layers, the more one safeguarded their modesty and respectability. When it came to the heart, spoken through clasped hands and exchanged kerchiefs, the path for Victorian women was similarly lined with unwritten rules. Expressing interest had to be clandestine, a task that demanded skill in the elegant art of subtlety. Yet, for all the prim politeness, the thrill of a shared glance across a ballroom could ignite more than the polite conversation of their current waltz. As the morning painted the streets in hues lightening with expectation, Victorian women embraced the art of storytelling themselves. Whether crafting positions of household power without title or commanding the attention of their companions through the intricate power of silence, they understood samurai-like discipline was needed to dance the societal tango. All of this performed under the gentle illusion of accomplishment, where behind withheld laughter awaited unspoken mischief. In this curious era, where rules dripped from daily life like the milk upon scones, Victorian women constructed a world of whispered gallantries, love laden with lace and courtesy. Their unwavering charm and resilience remain locked in our fond imaginations, each rule a stepping stone offset by the gentle rebellion brewing behind elaborately curtained drawing room windows. And as the night gently tucks its blanket of stars over the murmuring city, we leave these magnificent hosts of history to retire, curious as to how tomorrow's sunlit adventures might yet bauble their neatly composed tranquility. In the melodious symphony of Victorian life, women's attire was far more than an expression of personal style. It was a triple-layered slice of marmalade-crowned toast in the breakfast of propriety, complex, sticky, and absolutely mandatory. Let us promenade through the prim gardens of sartorial regulations and internalize the fabric of an epoch when dressing was both an art and a mathematics problem. Each morning, the ritual began with the donning of the chemise, a foundational garment as unassuming as a self-effacing butler whose only job was to prevent more expensive fabrics from personal encounters with skin. Over this flowed the corset, though to say it flowed might be generously imaginative. Designed to render the female form into a mesmerizing hourglass, a shape deeply cherished and rigorously pursued, corsets were often lace-etched cages, remorselessly held tight by an entourage of laces and stays. Imagine for a moment inviting a friend over for tea and asking them to ensconce themselves in an iron maiden politely lined with a comfortable brocade. This was akin to the daily dance Victorian women performed every morn, willingly submitting to a garment more committed to body sculpting than a modern gym membership. But of course, a well-corseted silhouette was but the introductory act. Over this carefully managed landscape were layered the petticoats, several of them, a veritable symphony of crinoline and cotton. Each added sway and stature, serving dual purpose as both insulation against the British chill and additional barrier to any hopeful suitors' ungentlemanly advances. Emerging from this cocoon was not simply a woman, it was an installation of societal rules, a code of conduct wrapped prettily in fabric. The preferred colors expressed one's station and mood, or the station and mood wished to be feigned. A tasteful shade of lavender was the narrative of mourning, while fiery reds and enthused greens talked of festive frivolity, boldly drawing the eye and commanding attention across parlors. Now, picture our Victorian heroine gliding on the cobblestones, equipped with a parasol, her personal force field against the most offensive solar impertinences. Hats, too, were not just headwear, but declarations of seasonal conquest, topped with flora and fauna, and sometimes entire nests that would make any passing ornithologist agog with confusion or delight. Nonetheless, imagine a world where everything you wore and every step you took had to be choreographed with reverence for social protocol. Beneath the rituals and starch, women were keen dancers in a cultural ballet that dictated how to laugh, talk, and breathe, all to the unyielding rhythm of etiquette. Next onto the timetable, we have the walking dress, a sensible ensemble appropriate for the day's jaunts, yet don't allow the adjective sensible to trick you into believing these were anything short of elaborate. These gowns needed to maintain elegance while also being ready for footfalls on imperfectly cobbled paths. The most multitasking affair, these dresses were laden with enough fabric to startle even the most opulent drapery. Ladies didn't go cavorting about bareheaded either. A bonnet was a headpiece, reflective of one's character. A public statement of decency, it acted much like a politician's campaign ad, though arguably the bonnet did a better job of staying true to its word. In every stitch, hem, pleat, and tuck, was evidence of a strict adherence to an unspoken contract that transcended cloth to inhabit the channels of societal reputation. Though, as one bid adieu to the day's wardrobe adventures, the evening garb awaited, a crescendo of satins and silks, appropriate for dinners, dances, and occasionally impromptu piano recitals if one was feeling particularly Schumanny. And with the gentle fall of the evening, we draw our corsets a touch looser, laying the groundwork for yet another day where attire would speak the unspoken rules and where each garment was a paragraph in the grand novel of identity. Let your thoughts wind down now, intertwining the sound of rustling taffeta with the upcoming tales of gloved hands navigating the labyrinth of polite conversation. But alas, that tale gently unfurls with the softness of morning's first light. Shall we drift into the radiant dance halls of Victorian society? Picture, if you will, a world of swirling skirts and streaming ribbons, where each twirl and curtsy is orchestrated to perfection, not unlike a grand ballet, except the dancers have more hoops around their waist than a circus seal. Now, Victorians took their dancing very seriously, or more accurately, their rules about dancing. You see, swaying to a waltz was akin to waltzing through a minefield of social guidelines. For instance, young ladies were not to sweep across the dance floor without being formally introduced to their partners. A breezy glissade with an unexplained gentleman could irreparably shake the very foundation of one's social standing. So, introductions were not just a polite hello, they were a ceremonial act, a bit like a modern-day LinkedIn connection, but with more bows and fewer cat memes. However, once the pleasantries were observed, a lady could glide into the arms of a gentleman, but always at a respectable distance, enough space, really, to accommodate a modest-sized hat collection. Alas, there was to be no wanton mingling with the sort of closeness that could scandalize the community. This respectable distance was, of course, entirely dependent on the breadth of hoop skirts that often resembled portable gazebo structures. As for attire, the dance floor was as much a battlefield of fashion as it was of dance skills. The combative weapon of choice, the corset. Dancing in a corset required the resilience of a boxer and the stamina of a marathon runner, all while maintaining the serene expression of an afternoon nap. Ladies managed the feat with aplomb, likely due to their secret training in the domestic arts of genteel feinting. It's worth mentioning the strict code of feet placement too. Heaven forbid a dainty slipper should land out of sync. This could cause a partner to misstep, leading to a collision that might topple over a chandelier and, more gravely, topple one's reputation. We can only imagine the endless hours spent among those polished wooden floors, whispering silent apologies to the ground beneath. Apologies, Parquet. My left foot strayed again. Each dance came with its own pageant of rules. The quadrilles, for example, were akin to an elaborate Rubik's Cube of human motion, requiring one to remember more rights and lefts than an ant navigating a maze. Meanwhile, the cotillion was not only a dance, but a test of diplomatic partnerships, ensuring you did not accidentally partner up or, heaven forbid, indicate favoritism towards the wrong individual, potentially a cousin of the Earl who constantly mispronounces bruschetta. The symphony of these dances was often accompanied by an assortment of musicians who, remarkably, were not stern disciplinarians, but rather merry folk, helping everyone keep time in this dizzying world of rhythm and poise. Yet, woe betide the musician who played a note even a hair's breadth off-key, for it could lead to chaos resembling a flock of startled chickens, the ultimate social faux pas. And let us not forget the post-dance critique, far more intricate than any dance itself. Gathering with fans, fluttering and tongues wagging, Victorians would savour the memory of every missed step and every triumphant turn, all analysed under the guise of refined conversation. In essence, the Victorian dance hall was a world unto itself, governed by invisible protocols as intricate as the lace on a debutante's glove. Perhaps it was precisely the intensity of these gatherings, exhausting, exhilarating, and full of unspoken drama, that led to their place in society as both a charming pastime and an undercover athletic event. As we leave the polished floors and echoing ballrooms of yesteryear, the world of Victorian revelry gently closes its doors upon our waking minds. For now, let us quietly tiptoe out of this glittering social canvas, moving forward to explore anew what nugget of sleepy history awaits. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a gentle amber glow across the tapestry of Victorian England, we find ourselves in the heart of a bustling parlour, all flouncy. Skirts and decorum, with lace-trimmed delicacies, where the women of the era gathered like moths drawn to the flickering flame of propriety. Now, if you were a Victorian woman stepping into this scene, you'd find a heady cacophony of whispers, all tucked neatly beneath the surface of finery and etiquette. Among these whispers were the sacrosanct regulations concerning one's posture, a subject of such importance that it might as well have been etched alongside Newton's laws of motion. Picture this: a woman draped in layers of silk and crinoline, her spine erect and poised, as if she were perpetually balancing an invisible family heirloom atop her head. Shoulders back, eyes forward, she hurtles toward destiny at the speed of leisure. Many pondered, could a woman's posture tell the secrets of her soul? Insinuations abounded, suggesting that bad posture was not just a faux pas, but a gateway to moral degeneracy. Heaven forbid a lady should slump. Such scandalous curves might lead her directly into the arms of a poorly bound novel, or worse, independence. Let us not forget the delicate dance of etiquette required in conversational nuances, especially for those with an unwarranted penchant for speaking their minds. In this parlour, dialect was an art, and an unsolicited opinion could be parried with a well-timed sip of tea. Mastery lay in traversing topics like weather, the unadulterated brilliance of botany, and why Cousin Eliza's hedgehogs are yet to win at the local fair, all whilst maintaining the conversational finesse akin to a waltz performed on a tightrope. Beyond the realms of conversation, there lay another distinct arena where Victorian women were expected to showcase their illustrious talents, the clandestine world of fan language. You see, the humble fan was not merely an accessory, but a silent orator, conveying messages men could never hope to comprehend. And perhaps this very complexity was the point. With the mere flick of a wrist or an exaggerated flutter, a woman could express amusement, dissent, baffling curiosity, and occasionally subtle inclinations of adoration, all without a single word. Grip tightly to your playbill of gestures, dear listener. Much is at stake at the evening soiree. And then, of course, there's the piano in the corner, which beckons with the promise of tunes wrapped up snugly in social approval. To be a woman of the times was to waltz hand in hand with musical proficiency. Not to mention, were a woman to demonstrate aptitudes in this artistic pursuit, it was invariably seen not as the birthing of a concert maestro, but rather the sharpening of her marital prospects, an impromptu audition for the role of charming wife number one. Why? Play one wrong note, and you might just find yourself pining for a more musically inclined suitor. As the evening draws on, the atmosphere swirls with the gentle hum of expectations. Each nod, each demure smile, another stitch in the tapestry of social, interaction. The air is a veritable cloud of giggles and genteel coughs, participants dipping their toes into small talk as one might probe the temperature of an unfamiliar pond. But alas, as with all good things, yes, even the steadfast rituals of Victorian decorum, our time in this fleeting world draws to a close. With one final curtsy and a deftly folded fan signalling undisclosed farewells, the women move back into their lives, cloaked once again in the armor of propriety. Close your eyes now. Bask in the warm afterglow of a bygone era, where secrets were stitched into coiffures and revelations whispered beneath the polyphonic gossamer of societal expectations. Listen closely, for as you drift into the arms of Hypnos, another tale of yesteryears awaits, just beyond the edges of dreamland. As we drift into the rather peculiar world of Victorian fashion, where the bizarre and the practical arm-wrestle daily, we find ourselves contemplating the colourful attire of the era's fairer sex. Ah yes, the wardrobe of a Victorian woman was like an overstuffed time capsule of contradictions, with petticoats whispering secrets to corsets and parasols sharing gossip with bonnets. In the grand parade of daily dress codes, the countless layers were not a mere indulgence, but rather acts of architectural genius, like a very stylish, wearable puzzle. The morning would often begin with a chemise, a simple garment so plain it could put a monk's robe to shame. Yet it served a more dignified purpose, a comfortable base layer under the impending mound of clothes. Think of it like a soft cotton respite, the calm before the fashionable storm. Next, the art of tight lacing, the corset. No matter how you cinch it, the logic remains hazy, much like the breathing of those who wore it. Imagine, if you will, having the grand illusion of an hourglass figure made real, all while sporting the lung capacity of a mild-mannered squirrel. Just a breath away from a swoon, really. One could say the corset was a more polite, socially acceptable way to wear a medieval torture device, with a touch more embroidery, of course. But this was Victorian England, where subtle artistry was jauntily tucked beneath an avalanche of numerous petticoats, making walking an experience not unlike maneuvering through a pile of overzealous bedding. The trick? A confident glide that whispered, "I mean business," even if business meant attempting to discreetly steer a mountain of tulle without toppling like a tipsy top hat. And then came the skirts. These were not merely skirts, but draping landscapes of fabric that threatened to swallow small children whole if one wasn't too careful. Fashion designers of the day must have been moonlighting as physicists, inventing crinolines that hinted at self-sufficiency, determined not to buckle under the weight of all the layers. A well-dressed lady was thus both an ensemble and an establishment, always a sight to behold, and sometimes a sight on which to stumble. Up top, the bodice completed this majestic tableau, cinching in where nature left off and buttons assumed responsibility. Victorian women raised fastening to an art form, an armor of textiles infused with frills, lace, and more or less practical embellishments. Truly, if you had to define impervious to a cold draft in fabric terms, one need look no further than the bodice, and lest we forget the appendages. Gloves, the crowning touch to any discerning lady's wardrobe, rendering handshakes a sport in tactile perception. Like tactile whispers, they adorned the hands of the genteel, signaling that the lady in question might lift her afternoon teacup without unduly warming the porcelain with bare fingers. As for hats, forget simple headwear. These adornments were more like miniature gardens or small ecosystems of millinery creativity balanced atop a carefully coiffed celebration of hair. One could imagine hats as miniature satellite dishes, poised and ready to beam one's social standing into the ether. Finally, the pièce de résistance, the parasol. Not just a shield from scandalous sun rays, but an accessory that could wave away impropriety with one elegant swish. Wily ladies wielding parasols could thwart all advances, by sun, rain, or sometimes an overly eager suitor. Such was the attire of a Victorian woman. Each garment, an act of cunning engineering. Each outfit, a performance in style and endurance. And as you gently let this myriad of fabric folds and frills lull you towards the land of Nod, dream lightly of how next we shall unbutton yet another layer of this intricate past, with a flourish of lace and a wink of witticism, as the gentle fog of the Victorian morning curled through the streets like a contentedly stretching cat. The women of the era were busy cloaking themselves in the intricate cocoons of propriety. You see, being a woman in the Victorian age was rather like being part of an exclusive club with an impossibly long rulebook, written in the tiniest of print, naturally. And if members failed to follow these strict guidelines, well, social ostracization awaited, a fate probably worse than being served weak tea at a tea party. Let's begin by slipping into our modest, ankle-length time machine, to an era where dress to impress meant squeezing oneself into a corset designed by architects, not seamstresses. The Victorian wardrobe, you'll find, was a marvel of engineering. Each day began with the ritual of the petticoat, a word which sounds pleasant until you remember there are at least 6 of them, each more billowy than the last. A Victorian woman, it turns out, carried her own climate-controlled environment wherever she went. Rainy weather? No problem. She had those spare petticoats. Once properly scaffolded into their dresses, or perhaps should I say, once safely ensconced in their fabric forts, Victorian women had to be graceful if only because falling over risked unscheduled cartwheels of bloomers and laces. Naturally, those voluminous skirts came with certain navigational challenges. Ever wonder why Victorian women were so adept at keeping their balance while executing a perfect curtsy? It's rather simple. Like sailors on a stormy sea, they had to master the art of maintaining dignity while afloat on waves of satin. Now, one of the strictest rules in the Victorian Code was the subtle but all-important art of displaying the right level of enthusiasm. Never too much, lest you're accused of being uncultured, but certainly never too little. A measured, demure excitement was the answer. When receiving a marriage proposal, for example, the appropriate reaction was less an exclamation of joy and more a gentle nod, accompanied by a slight blush of decorum. Victorians, you see, enjoyed their emotions in tasteful, bite-sized pieces. And how about that essential Victorian pastime? Letter writing. A truly Herculean endeavor. Writing a letter was an intricate dance with excessive politeness. One could spend days documenting family outings or a sufficiently neutral opinion on recent weather conditions. After all, Keepile d'Or could never risk an abrupt punctuation mark. Decorum delighted in preamble and purling phrases, all flowing along a river of endlessly looped penmanship. And of course, etiquette didn't cease when indoors. Despite the absence of modern social media, Victorian women faced critiques that were just as harrowing. The drawing room or salon was the epicenter of social judgment. Every conversational nuance, every flicker of the eyelash, was fair game for scandalous reinterpretation the following morning. Even one's choice of seating could wade into controversy. Perch too close to the fireplace, and you'd be suspected of flamboyant zeal. Too far, and don't you dare shiver, lest whispers of biting, unladylike coldness whirl around the room. Yet, amidst all these terrors of textile and talk, there was that wondrous quality to the era. Living ensconced in such careful cultural cocoons meant that everyone involved was an unwitting co-creator in an elaborate, ongoing theatrical display. Each day offered another chance to engage with a world composed as much of manners and manners of speech as it was of the senses. And just as the night rolls over onto a starlit dial, catching threads of ephemeral conversations, so too did Victorian women know the strength of their silent witness under a sky that, if it cared to, could remember the sound of 1,000 fluttering fans. Perchance, as our own night wraps itself around us, we shall unfurl the delights of yet another curiosity from this whimsical, bygone world, a chapter yet to gracefully unfold. As the gentle fog of evening settles over our story, let us drift back to a time when society's rules were the elaborate embroidery stitching the fabric of everyday Victorian life. Imagine yourself walking down a cobblestone path in a bustling 19th century town, your path illuminated by the soft glow of gas lamps flickering romantically in the distance. The air is filled with the clatter of horse-drawn carriages and the faint murmur of decorum. Such was the soundscape of Victorian England. Here, a Victorian woman found herself entwined in a delicate dance, a ballet of expectations choreographed by the etiquette manuals of the day. Among many were the subtle yet significant rules guiding one's sartorial ensemble. While today we might opt for comfort or a sparkle of individuality, Victorian women were bound by an entire encyclopedia of fashion dictations, with all the flair of an instruction manual for assembling complex flat-pack furniture. Foremost among these style decrees was the illustrious art of wearing hats. Much like the modern-day complicity with smartphones, a Victorian woman without a hat was akin to leaving the house barefoot. The hat was more than merely a piece of headwear. It was a statement, a calling card, an entire conversation piece balanced precariously atop one's coiffure. But wearing a hat was not carte blanche to run amok in any bonnet or beanie one so desired. Oh no, The seasons themselves dictated hat materials and colors. Silk in the spring, velvet in winter, straw for warmer months, as though the good Lord himself had decreed that a mismatched material might cause societal discord. Next in this terrestrial tale of tradition was the demanding affair of gloves. While in our hasty modern world, hands often fly freely, unhindered by fabric, Victorian ladies don gloves as though their bare hands were a forbidden fruit. Removing gloves in public was a faux pas, tantamount to yodeling in a library. For every occasion, there existed a corresponding glove, day gloves, evening gloves, even morning gloves, suggesting that even grief required a specialized sartorial nod. Amidst this, the parasol floated into view, as essential a partner to a Victorian woman as any handbag or phone might be today. But alas, its function was not to shield from rain. That was the umbrella's kingdom. It protected fair complexions from the sun's scandalous kisses. A tan was the hallmark of the working class, and a lady diligent in her tanning saw her social status diminished like an overexposed portrait. Amid such elegant necessities, let us not forget the evening's grand soirees, where the rules of behavior were more demanding than the dress code itself. Entertain the idea of a dinner so grand that entire days could be spent preparing for it, not just the host, who orchestrated this culinary symphony, but for guests who navigated the fractious waters of etiquette. If you were seated to the right of the host, you were indeed special. Though this honor came bound with responsibility, you might be expected to polish your conversational skills to a veneer, engaging in light banter that would gently tease minds without leaving marks or blemishes. To laugh too loudly, to dominate the conversation was akin to wearing an overabundant amount of brilliant feathers upon one's hat, a sight memorable for the wrong reasons. Bidding adieu to this restrained yet whimsical era, our soft focus drifts like a feather on time's breeze. With every stitched compliance, every polished shoe, and demure nod, we uncover layers not just of clothing, but of history sewn into stories enriching our dream-bound minds. As we turn the pages of our tale's next chapter, we carry with us the gentle absurdity of a world crafted by its own complex symphony of rules, not so unlike our own. Floating ever closer to the soothing shores of sleep, a world awaits, ready to reveal its next historical secret. As the gentle glow of gaslights flickered through the elegantly furnished parlors of Victorian homes, the women of this illustrious era found themselves bound not by chains, but by a strict etiquette, as intricate as the lace on their corsets. In a time when fashion was as much a statement as any political discourse, it is in the harmonious chaos of petticoats and social expectations that we'll find today's story. Picture, if you will, a young lady setting out on a socially sanctioned call to a friend's home. Instead of grabbing a coat, the Victorian woman would layer on an ensemble that could rival a small circus in complexity. A chemise for modesty, corset for posture, several petticoats for volume, and, of course, a gown that could cause heads to turn and spines to shudder. Yet, despite the sartorial spectacle, every frilled edge and boned bodice whispered of a peculiar regulation. She had to navigate the delicate dance of fashion without ever tipping into the treacherous territory of indecency. A single glimpse of ankle could potentially cause an uproar equal to that of a misplaced teacup at a garden party. Even the act of walking was filled with its own set of do's and don'ts. As she swanned down the street, this genteel swan must glide, not stomp, nor even dawdle. Her pace should mirror that of a gentle brook, soothing, graceful, and naturally captivating, as if a hidden string quartet was persistently serenading her every step. Social visiting itself came with a quirkily Victorian set of rules. Visiting hours were strictly observed, falling between 3 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. A visit was neither to be too brief, lest it seem insulting, nor too long, lest one's host begin preparing an impromptu bedroom. If you had overstayed your welcome, you'd likely be treated to a discreet yawn or strategic retire. Ah, the yawn, a silent, universal plea in social situations that transcends time and fashion. Meanwhile, in conversational realms, our Victorian sisters wielded the art of subtle conversation with the same dexterity as an acrobat twirling on a tightrope. Discussing anything unladylike was a strict prohibition, and while today we might openly chat about everything from politics to the blazing drama of our latest internet binge, the Victorian woman stayed confined to the safer waters of the weather, or perhaps the tiniest hint of gossip as the sugar in her conversational tea. Heaven forbid any lady should express an opinion too strong. No, that might cause moustaches to quiver and monocles to dramatically plummet from well-groomed faces. Then there was, of course, the extraordinary expectation surrounding marriage, an institution approached not merely as a romantic pursuit, but a strategic dance requiring the finesse of a chess master. In this game of wedded chess, the young woman must present herself as a queen, capable of making her own moves, yet seemingly happy to maintain her king in his place of honor. Not to mention how she must elegantly navigate between the roles of hostess, partner, and ever-gracious lady of the house. Finally, let's not forget the peculiar yet charming quirk of managing one's fragrance. Victorian women should smell as lightly of roses, violets, or lavender as whispering winds through an English garden. Anything stronger would send the very butterflies into a flutter of confusion. Personal perfumes were to be as subtle as a secret, never overwhelming, for fear of drowning out one's own delicate essence. Yes, the Victorian woman's world was an arena of etiquette and grace, where the unspoken language of rules guided society's every step. As our heroine curtsied out of her friend's drawing room, we find her stepping into the cool embrace of the evening. Her day's dance through ribbons of expectations might leave her feeling relieved as the streets lit up with gas lamps glowing like sleepy stars. And with each flicker, they seemed to whisper that tomorrow promised another delightful chapter, one perhaps where the mysteries of Victorian dining conventions await discovery. In the hushed shadows of Victorian England, the expectations for women often seemed as multi-layered as a lady's finest petticoat, stitched delicately yet tightly in lace and societal norms. Among the many strictures sat the delicate art of letter writing, a pastime for the genteel lady that was as crucial a skill as embroidery, but perhaps a tad less likely to poke holes in your thumb. Picture a young Victorian lady seated at her writing desk, carefully poised to pen her thank you notes and social correspondences with the delicate flourishes befitting her class. Mind you, these weren't your modern, hastily typed text messages adorned with emojis. Victorian missives were meticulously crafted sagas, where every sentence had to carry the weight of propriety, eloquence, and just enough ambiguity to keep gossips guessing for days. Now, should our gentlewoman desire to write a letter offering a simple invitation for tea, she couldn't simply jot down, "Fancy some Earl Grey at 3." Heavens no. She would instead embark on a verbal journey akin to a mini-novel, ensuring her intent was as sugar-coated as the biscuits she would offer. The phrasing would be a subtle symphony of, "It would truly be the highlight of my humble day if you could grace my drawing room with your esteemed presence at the 3rd hour past midday." But what if penning more profound feelings? Say, a clandestine crush on a dashing suitor? The Victorian woman's quill danced a more intricate ballet here. Direct declarations were as forbidden as corset-free attire. Rather, she might compose poetic musings about the loveliness of a certain someone's brilliant smile, warming even the most overcast of London afternoons, all wrapped in layers of metaphorical clouds. The writing desk, forever neat as a pin, was her loyal companion, complete with paper sheets that boasted a lovely watermark, a collection of quills with elegantly carved handles, and inkwells capable of partnerships with any palette of propriety. Seals of red wax and monogrammed embossments were tools not just of utility, but of status, turning each envelope into a work of personal heraldry. As she composed her literary masterpieces, Our Lady had the distinct pleasure, some might call it a requirement, of ensuring her penmanship was as graceful as her waltz, a veritable ballet of ink across an ivory stage. A smudged letter could speak volumes about one's upbringing. perhaps revealing an unfortunate fondness for haste, or worse yet, an unbecoming nervousness. Yet, behind all this decorum and attention to elegant detail lay coded messages woven into the lines. An adept reader might just uncover traces of sarcasm concealed in flourishes or ennui hidden behind every comma. This, dear listeners, is where the true art resided, not merely in skillful script, but in the gentle act of subversion where one could communicate everything and nothing all at once. Now, if you were to peep into the parlor after such correspondence had flown reluctantly from hand to post, Our Lady might settle into her plush armchair with a sigh of relief and a clandestine grin. Was she perhaps thinking of how many ways her recipient might interpret her ink dance, and what interpretations might ripple through the gossip vine, a true currency of the times? Allow your mind to sink with ease into the foggy mists of bygone days as you imagine her resting quietly now, her evening chores of diplomacy fulfilled. The flicker of a candle casts gentle shadows that whisper old secrets of ink-written tales on the walls. What dreams may drift to her from the letters she penned, but now wait within the moonlit ride toward their recipient. While you find yourself drifting off to sleep, ponder the infinite stories born out of simple turns of phrase. Victorian letters were, after all, as crafty as the finest lacework, and, just like the changing tides of the fashionably complex crinoline, ever subject to reinterpretation. And so, the night cradles you softly with dreams of quills and shadows, as we meander toward tomorrow's tales, where new strictures yet await. Discovery, with mystery, as always, just a page turn away. In the velvety quietude of a Victorian morning, where the sunlight spilled through lace-curtained windows like a timid guest, a young lady's day began not with a yawn, but with a symphony of seemingly invisible rules orchestrating her every movement. It was a world where wearing the wrong bonnet might ignite enough scandal to set the Yorkshire moors ablaze. At the heart of this symphony was the calling card etiquette. Yes, dear listener, these were not mere pieces of paper, but the social currency that dictated the blessed union of high tea chit-chats and arranged promenades. Making a morning visit required not just grace, but the dexterity of a master spy. The family footman, a figure both silent and judgmental, would never let anyone through the gilded doors without the requisite piece of embossed cardboard. Imagine, if you will, the endless, somnolent serenity of a doily-covered drawing room where the good ladies of the Victorian era exchanged such cards with the fervor one might expect from a game of strategic chess. "My dear Mrs. Wells," one might exclaim, "such an exquisite filigree on your card, and such impeccable penmanship, a skill as essential as it was stultifyingly dull." And so, like majestic ships in the night, these cards floated between the ranks of society, allowing ladies to navigate the often treacherous seas of social interaction without uttering a single misstep. Imagine the relief such ceremonies provided, from keeping one's feet out of their mouths to keeping one's husband's success afloat. Leaving our drawing room, let us tiptoe into the private domain of the dressing room, a true sanctum of transformation where fashion demanded the utmost from its devoted acolytes. Here, a lady might battle her own personal boa constrictor of whalebone and fabric, the dreaded corset. Though promoted as supportive allies, these garments were the stuff of whispered curses. Yet, armed with resilience, the Victorian woman was a corset conqueror, binding her rebellion thousands of times in pursuit of the ideal hourglass figure. Indeed, nothing could be left to chance, not even her hair, a sacred battleground for the principles of gravity and imagination. Coils, braids, and at least 14 era-specific gadgets transformed it into architectural wonders worthy of their own blueprints. Misplace a pin, however, and risk toppling this precarious tower, all before elevenses. But let us not bypass the slippered feet of the day. A shoe of good taste required not merely a snug fit, but the smallest possible size. The result? A genteel tiptoeing through life's formalities, performing a dainty ballet with all the grace Ziegfeld's Follies could only dream of. One might say that Victorian ladies tread lightly, both in action and intention. As the day drew to a close, the daily symphony dimmed, but our Victorian lady was not yet free of her enchanting duties. She had another right, something to endure, the art of writing letters. A single slip of the pen was akin to indecent exposure, as telling missteps in such communications could incite a tempest. Forget SOS. Here, the call for help was more daintily hidden in the phrase, "Your kind and forthright words continue to resonate," meaning, if you think your gossip has gone unnoticed, you're wrong. Yet, in this charming labyrinth of etiquette and expectation, these women wielded a quiet power. Through deft gesturing of fans, a language itself, they could convey scandalous whispers, heartfelt declarations, and sharp rebuffs, all without a spoken word. It was a secret sorority of coded communication, where the day's frustrations could be unfurled, subtly but eloquently, with a flick of the wrist. As the corset was loosened, and the bustle laid to rest, Victorian women finally succumbed to the silken embrace of their own dreams. They were architects, strategists, and poets woven into the fabric of tea parties and parlor games. Their strict yet silent rebellion was both a charming comedy and a heartbreaking drama. So, dear listener, nestle further into the comfort of your dreams as the shadows lengthen into the soft folds of your night. And from this world of calling cards and corsets, we drift onwards toward another tale of serene precision and social choreography, gently flipping the languid pages of time. As the whisper of turning pages leads us deeper into the velvety tapestry of Victorian society, we find ourselves wandering the perfectly pruned hedgerows of a rather particular letter of the alphabet, S. Ah yes, the S for sublime, or strict, depending on whom you asked. For the women of the time, it wrapped around their lives like a corset, which, coincidentally, is a delightful segue into this chapter's first reservation under the Victorian rulebook: the subtle art of sway and spool, the etiquette of sitting, and the choreography of the corset. Imagine waking up each morning not to the gentle buzz of a smartphone, but to the distant cries of a street vendor selling milk and newspaper boys heralding the latest news of some distant conflict or scandal. You'd stretch, insofar as a tightly bound corset allowed, and begin the grand dance of drapery. Multiple layers, each affixed precisely to convey a blend of modesty and local fashionability. Ladies back then were practically acrobats because sitting down required more than just a bend at the knees. Oh no, it was the intricate act of sinking into a chair, softly like a cat does onto its favorite sunlit perch, lest the bones of the corset remind them of their presence with a jab. Desks were forsaken in favor of elegant little writing tables, ensuring that even the act of correspondence maintained a posture befitting a duchess. With clothing sorted and posture perfected, our intrepid Victorian woman would now step out into the world, careful to wield her parasol with a deftness that suggested demure rather than warrior with a sunshade. The parasol, mind you, was not just a stalwart guard against freckles, but also a handy gauge of social station. One had to murmur their morning pleasantries from beneath their brim with a grace that spoke louder than words. Ah, and the art of conversation. It was a tranquil affair, with one's speech gliding softly over topics like a butter knife over warmed buns. An astute Victorian lady knew never to plunge into the social quagmire of politics or money in polite company. Instead, safe harbors such as weather prospects and floral arrangements provided the verbal compass by which one navigated dinner parties and afternoon tea. A day in Victorian times was an exercise in the genteel mystery, an exploration of the known through the lens of the strictly appropriate. As our delicate conversationalist meandered through humdrum parlors or took afternoon strolls in hands-free park lanes, every glance and gesture was laden with meaning, yet meticulously unambiguous. They upheld a narrative where walking sticks weren't merely fashionable props, but also the solid punctuation on the end of a gentleman's declaration of presence. By evening, with duties fulfilled, both social and familial, the Victorian woman might return home to the comfort of private amusements, needlepoint and poetry, perhaps, or a clandestine novel tucked within the binding of a scripture. The flicker of candlelight provided an intimate embrace as she settled into a quieter rhythm, freed at least for a few blissful hours from the prying gaze of societal scrutiny. And yet, despite the intricate choreography required by daily life, there existed a certain charm, a kind of rhythmic stability promised by these unyielding customs. As curious as it sounds, the predictability of knowing exactly how one ought to behave and wear and speak must have been somewhat soothing, like the predictable tick of a grandfather clock standing vigilant in the hall. In following these strict yet soothing rules, the Victorian woman danced her way through life's elaborate ball, a silent language of customs where the play's script was written not in ink but in decorum. And as she retired, the day's myriad manners accumulated into a quiet sense of timelessness, echoing through every subsequent generation of women who would cast aside the corset but retain the memory of its graceful demands. Now, as the gentle twilight hour draws close, let your imagination drift softly from the well-worn fabric of these vibrant, enduring times, with the whispering shadows casting soft and soothing shapes over your thoughts. A hint of what's to arise shimmers on the horizon, guiding us gently and calmly into the next chapter of silent secrets and spoken decorum. In the flickering candlelight of a Victorian drawing room, one could almost imagine a parliament of parasols huddled together, debating the day's prospects like a bevy of peculiar law-keepers. You see, the Victorian era was a time when even the most mundane accessories seemed to carry a significance far beyond their form. In Chapter 18, we cast our sleepy eyes upon the world of elegant conventions and why everyday objects were practically infused with the gravity of a Sunday sermon. Imagine a realm where gloves weren't just snug protectors against the chill, but were ticket stubs signifying your entry into the ranks of genteel society. Victorian ladies knew their gloves whispered secrets of sophistication. Wearing them too tightly might suggest one's social aspirations were as overstretched as a poorly made crinoline. The gentle art of glove etiquette dictated that a lady must remove her gloves finger by finger at the dining table, a process more intricate than unraveling a tightly wound anecdote at afternoon tea. One must never eat while gloved, lest one wishes to flaunt rules akin to wearing shoes on a pristine divan, a delightful horror if there ever was one. Consider, if you will, the magnitude of the calling card. This small rectangle of weighty paper was the lifeline to one's social sanity. Upon it were embossed the names of both husband and wife, transforming the bearer into a social diplomat of sorts. More persuasive than even the most rousing parliamentary speech, a lady's collection of calling cards was akin to a modern Rolodex of relevance, while leaving one premeditatedly at an acquaintance's door conveyed the unspoken, "I exist, and I expect the teapot to be steaming by the time I call again." The sheer art of paying a call was an endeavor in perseverance bested only by ascending Everest, had it existed in the kingdom of drawing-room Everest replicas. Upon arrival, after placing one's card on the salver, a ceremonial platter for paper introductions, it was crucial to remain precisely the amount of time as dictated by subtle nods, so as not to wear welcome thin. Lawful foes of the all-too-enthusiastic guest existed, and they were known as curtsies. The deeper they went, the longer one could inevitably stay. Subtle, indeed, was the exchange of nods and angles, more a Shakespearean tale in minutiae than any awkward ping-pong match of today. Beyond social visits, the rules of comportment extended to the way one gracefully floated through life, wearing a ballroom's worth of fabric daily. Women of the Victorian era wielded their gowns with all the precision of an engineer operating a steam engine on a particularly foggy London night. Negotiating doorways without a bustled skirt tripping them was an art form, and lifting one's voluminous edges for anything other than the most decorous of ascents up a staircase was rightly scandalous. Voluminous skirts and narrow hallways were the societal challenges that would leave modern-day reality competition shows quaking in their considerably smaller boots. But the rules continued from sunrise till sunset, where one would retire clothed smartly in logic, defying buttoned pajamas, because who dared to allow dreams to occur without a bit of reserve? And by night's descent into fragrant lavender dreams, one would reflect upon a day delicately woven in the fabric of rigid, yet comfortably predictable courtesies. With all these daily demands, one might say, Victorian women lived lives eruditely choreographed and elegantly baffling. Though these rules may now seem quaint as logic puzzles crafted by an eccentric clockmaker, they were once the very threads that stitched the tapestry of ordinary Victorian life, each rule creating a comfort and order that gently lulled society to sleep. As we gently drift towards the muted whispers of our next reverie, perhaps we glean from this era that life's precision can be as soothing as it is mysterious. But, dear dreamer, save the classroom of curiosities that Victorian life still holds for our soft awakening in dreams yet to come, as we turn the page and pour deeper into the drowsy folds of history, as we drift into the evening. Ambience of 19th century England. Let us tiptoe hushfully into the drawing rooms and boudoir of Victorian women, the curators of etiquette so meticulous. It makes a Swiss clock look loose and accommodating. Picture, if you will, a domestic ballet of fans and fainting couches, a place where even the laced doilies are given careful consideration. Indeed, Victorian society laid upon women a book of regulations thicker than any Dickens novel. When we speak of etiquette, we're talking about the queen of them all, Queen Victoria herself, who set a paragon so grand that her subjects scrambled to emulate her every demure nod and perfectly timed curtsy. For the women of this era, life was something akin to an elaborate chess match with lots of polite smiling and the occasional scandalous exchange of a carefully gloved hand. Consider the complexity of a Victorian wardrobe. Every garment told a story, each layer an intricately woven chapter of modesty and social cues. Beneath miles of crinoline and corsets as tight as a miser's purse string, there was no room to bend the rules, literally or figuratively. Each article had a raison d'être that was as profound as a Russian novel. Petticoats, chemises, camisoles and bustles created a veritable fortress of fabric that declared, "Here is a woman of virtue," or possibly, "Please give me a seat before I collapse." Victorian women had to navigate the treacherous waters of conversation with the skill of a diplomat and the brevity of a telegram. They were taught to waltz through discussions like ballerinas, tiptoeing across a stage, never stepping on the sensitive toes of politics or religion. Those eager to critique their surroundings would often cloak their wit in an embroidered veil of politeness. For instance, if one needed to express dissatisfaction, a tap of the fan for silence, a tilt of the head to the left, and 20 words to say what could easily have been conveyed in 2. "Please pass the butter" could be a veritable sonnet. And hope, or heaven forbid, you should encounter a moment alone with a gentleman. Victorian advice was clear. One must avoid prolonged silences that might lead to romantic imaginations. Women were counseled to speak of weather patterns, the superiority of Constantine dray horses, or perhaps offer a soft commentary on the latest Bach concerto, just anything to ensure that romantic notions stayed at bay until the wind carried them away. Household management was no minor task either. Running a household was akin to orchestrating an opera where servants played the instruments and the lady of the house waved the baton. From selecting the finest china pattern to resolving the hotly debated placement of tea cozies, managing a Victorian household required keen judgment, magnificent restraint, and a deftness to avert crises such as the mismatched cutlery or, perish the thought, a creased tablecloth. Tea itself was an event as sacred and serious as a Sunday. Sermon, brewed at the temperature of royal approval, accompanied by all the grace of a well-executed aria. Taking tea involved a precise ritual with more rules than a high-stakes card game. Cream or lemon, but never both. And avoid dunking your biscuit unless you were a fan of casting dubious glances in your direction. As daylight fades into the shades of a Victorian twilight, we find our tranquil selves reclining once more upon the plush chairs of historical inquiry, where the whispering waltz of petticoats and fragrant scent of freshly brewed Earl Grey invite contemplation. The clocks softly tick in their omnipresent stewardship of time, inviting us forward into the next chapter, where mysteries yet unspoken await the gentle touch of narrative exploration. As the gaslights in Victorian London flickered against the evening mist, casting intriguing shadows across the cobblestone streets, we find ourselves journeying through the curious corridors of the Victorian dress code. Collection of woven rules as tightly stitched as the corsets they revered. Ah, the corset, a true emblem of the age. Hugging waists tighter than a lover's embrace, yet offering none of the comfort. A garment so restrictive and yet so necessary that it could allegedly lure at least 3 gentlemen into a spontaneous swoon merely by its mention. You see, the ideal Victorian woman was bound by the gravity-defying aspirations of societal expectations. Her waist was to be as narrow as a teacup, her behavior as delicate as the finest china. But despite its challenges, the corset did have its perks. After all, carrying around a portable mannequin stand was always a possibility, should the need arise to display the latest in embroidery skills, or indeed faint gracefully onto a conveniently nearby chaise longue. Dressing was a multi-layered endeavor, a veritable Tower of Babel of textiles. Victorians approached their wardrobe with the seriousness of an architect approaching a blueprint, piecing together petticoats that rivaled cumulonimbus clouds for volume. And lest we forget the crinoline, a hoop skirt that could smartly double as personal space enforcement in crowded rooms. Some say it even inspired the first concept of the social distancing circle, though wildly unsanctioned by historical documents. But what of those gloves, you ask? Oh, fret not. They were the true unsung heroes of the sartorial saga, buffers between a refined lady's fingertips and the vagaries of the outside world, safeguarding not only the skin, but also the sacred Victorian virtue. A positive biological wonder, those gloves. Perhaps they aspired to become remnants of pristine relics in far-off shoeboxes, inscribed with tales of long moonlit walks and forbidden handshakes. As day slipped into night, the Victorian lady would transform her attire as if rehearsing for the most elegant of stage plays, replacing daytime practicality with evening glamour. Her jewelry, which had spent the day hiding coyly in an ornate box, would suddenly spring to life, eager to join soirees that buzzed with hushed whispers and the clink of crystal glasses. Jewelry, after all, was regarded as a mirror of one's social standing. Wearing pieces too large suggested ostentation, while jewelry too diminutive verged on impropriety, much like a colossus wandering through a quaint English garden bent on balance. In the pursuit of the ideal, no detail was too small. Stockings had their rules too, finely tailored and painstakingly embroidered with unfathomable devotion. Any lapse in stocking protocol could cause as much scandal as an actor unexpectedly striding off script during a Shakespearean tragedy. An ill-timed gust revealing an ankle could result in a veritable storm of gossip, but perhaps, secretly, a wry smile from those more progressive minds who will change like a passing breeze. The remarkable symphony of Victorian fashion was one of paradox and whimsy, one that often suggested narrow paths and massive skirts as metaphors for women's roles and societal expectations. Yet, within these confines, many women found ways to express individuality and subtle rebellion, not unlike a crescendo hidden within a lullaby. So, as our night draws closely upon us and the moon peeks out from behind gentle clouds, one can almost visualize those crinoline-clad figures gliding gracefully under the stars. Tomorrow's dawn will weave another chapter in the ever-changing tapestry of their lives. And with that gentle thought, let us continue our journey through the boundaries of time, where history hangs as heavy as the intricate lace veils that shroud these Victorian secrets. In the twilight of Victorian England, an era swathed in elegance and peculiarities, there was a plethora of rules that governed a woman's existence as tightly as a corset. Picture, if you will, the women of that time, moving like ethereal waltz dancers through a landscape embroidered with societal expectations and laced with more regulations than a cricket match. As a Victorian lady, every day was a carefully orchestrated performance where even the act of taking a simple stroll resembled a scene out of a costume drama rather than an idle amble into town. One of the most baffling rules Victorian women navigated was the artful dance of curtsying. Ah yes, the curtsy, a delicate maneuver that was at the very heart of Victorian social engagements. But this wasn't merely a gracious dip as many might expect. Oh no, when meeting someone of higher social standing, it was a miniature theatrical performance. Each curtsy required not just precision, but also panache. Bend too deeply, and you might knock over your hat. Bend insufficiently, and it could be construed as a social affront, warranting nothing short of scandalous gossip. To perfect this intricate greeting, some young ladies wore special curtsy training apparatus in their lounging rooms. Picture this if you can. An elegant, Victorian sitting room, replete with tea sets and embroidered cushions, yet incongruously, a veritable obstacle course of hat stands and piles of books to tiptoe around. Like a ballet class with crinoline skirts, and one hopes, in less dangerous footwear, women hone their skills for potential future encounters with dukes, or at least a wayward neighbor with a title. Fashion, too, was not just a matter of style, but a strict discipline. Consider briefly the rituals surrounding gloves. Women of the day never appeared in public barehanded. Gloves were as essential as good manners. They could only be removed once sitting cozily in a private drawing room, much like a modern actor discarding a character after the curtain fall. A glove etiquette faux pas, such as removing one too soon, was akin to forgetting one's lines on stage, a societal misstep certain to launch 1,000 whispers. Let's further embroider this tapestry of tradition with the madness of mealtime formalities. 1. Might assume dinner was solely a gastronomic affair, yet Victorian dining was steeped in social cues that could leave the uninitiated reeling. The order of precedence dictated who sat where with all the rigidity of a military formation. Woe betide the diner who forgot the progression from fish fork to dessert spoon. They might find themselves as socially adrift as a mixed-up meat pie. Each late afternoon moment was punctuated by the grand ceremony of tea, which came bundled with its own set of delicate intricacies. Imagine brewing tea, not just as a delightful pause in the day, but as both a science and an art. The water must be just so boiling, the leaves steeped not a moment longer than required. Misjudge, and the tea could be too strong or too weak, the scandal of which would brew stronger than the Earl Grey itself. Last, we must touch upon the enduring intrigue of the Victorian calling card custom. These little rectangles of social currency held more weight than a modern credit score. The simple act of leaving a card, elegantly scripted and trespassively poised on a silver tray in the hallway, could dictate a woman's entire social calendar. If accepted, she might be granted entrance into much coveted social circles. But a snub? One might as well have had the card stamped "Return to sender," with perhaps a perfumed handkerchief offered in consolation. As the gas lamps flicker, their last farewell to the day, we leave these imaginings of Victorian life with the softened lint of nostalgia, stepping down a rope ladder of gentility into the calm waters of an approaching reverie. Next, in a gentle turn of the evening, we'll explore another facet of this era's curious tapestry, one tickled with as much whispered intrigue as there is velvet in a drawing room chaise. As we gently float through the soft focus lens of the past, let's peek into the rather peculiar world of Victorian sleepwear. Yes, quite right, the Victorians had very particular standards, even for attire destined for those blissful hours when they were safely tucked away from the prying gaze of their ever-discerning society. Picture this. It's a chilly Victorian night in London. The gas lamps flicker feebly outside your frosted window panes as you prepare for repose. Evening rituals complete, it's time to don your nightdress, an utterly vital, if somewhat cumbersome, ensemble. Imagine layers of weighty linen or flannel in opulent floor-sweeping designs that would make any modern duvet jealous, with lace trims and ruffles extravagantly bestowed upon every conceivable edge. These were less garments and more like fabric swathes where practicality and modesty waged their nightly battles. Now, it wasn't just about looking like a cloud of Victorian virtue encapsulated. These garments had more rules than one could shake a bedpost at. You see, a nightdress had to be sufficiently modest, concealing one's form even more than a peculiarly enthusiastic fog surrounding Big Ben. The idea was to ensure that should one suddenly decide to attend to a late-night emergency, one would maintain decorum even while racing to save the family cat from an exploratory overreach on the mantelpiece. In fairness, looking like a swirling mass of fabric tends to complicate feline rescue missions, but who are we to argue with propriety? For those residing in the upper echelons of society, one's nighttime attire was often complemented by an all-important accessory, the nightcap. Do not mistake this for a wee tipple to aid one's slumber. That would be quite the scandal. No, we refer to the headwear variety, a close-fitting cap fashioned to keep every delicate ringlet in its proper place until dawn. Now, I know what you're thinking. Perhaps, just maybe, these nightcaps also doubled as deterrents against the dastardly drafts of old houses. Imagine awaking to chilly cobwebs curling down the neck and no warm shawl at hand. What horror. Thus, these whimsical hats became essential, providing both warmth and the impeccable coif that Victorian society expected of you at any hour. Yet, conformity in sleepwear didn't just stem from societal standards. It was also understood, implicitly yet universally, that one's choice of sleep attire was determined by the distinct climate of one's sleeping quarters. For example, those unfortunate Victorians who called drafty castles home would often layer their nightshirts so adeptly they might as well have been conducting a symphony of fabric. Others, blessed with central heating through wintry nights, afforded themselves lighter fare, even if this meant occasionally arousing fashionable outrage among stuffy gatherings of fellow night enthusiasts. As our dreamlike exploration into Victorian slumber comes to a close, let's ponder their steadfast dedication to a bedtime ethos. Their nightly routines blossomed into ceremonious pursuits, marked by an array of sleepwear standards that inspired both admiration and a rather distinct form of gentle exasperation, a sort of sartorial insomnia of days gone by. And so, as you drift into your own blissful slumber, picture yourself in the cozy embrace of a Victorian nightdress, though preferably sans the inevitable fabric labyrinth. Slowly, let this sleepy reverie pull you into the next chapter where more peculiar customs await, shrouded in the wistful haze of time's embrace. Imagine, if you will, an age when a lady's social life practically demanded the dexterity of a circus performer, but paired it with the fashion of a layered cake. Much like that elaborate dessert at a tea party, the Victorian woman's life was multi-layered and far too beautiful to be comfortably functional. In the gracious society's acrobatic waltz, no detail was too small to survive the magnifying glass of propriety, and today we wander through one of those intricate details, the coded language of flowers. Yes, flowers. Those lovely, innocent additions to any garden were the clandestine mode of communication for Victorian women. Imagine texting, but with bouquets. Bouquets that had the delicate power to express everything from romantic intentions to mild distaste. After all, why confront someone directly when you can send them a bunch of yellow carnations to do the dirty work for you? The language of flowers, or floriography, was not just a pastime but a necessary craft. Each petal and bloom held a message, and let's be honest, who wouldn't want to say it with flowers? But decipher that dainty daffodil with care, for a misplaced petunia could spell social disaster. The gracious Victorians turned botanicals into an opera of emotions, with roses crooning about love, while marigolds murmured on melancholy. If you received a spray of lavender, you could rest assured that devotion was in the air. perhaps paired with a hint of, "Your hat is particularly fetching today," and heavens forbid you received a bouquet of chive blossoms. The pungent subtext could mean your breath was less than amiable, cleverly encoded in foliage that would not only send a message, but also provide seasoning for this evening's stew. Meanwhile, that blushing bunch of white roses you received, it murmured whispers of chastity and purity, timeless virtues indeed, though one can only wonder about the enthusiastic deliverer's pastimes. Now, it wouldn't be Victorian England without a dash of scandal. There was always the daring possibility of slipping a cactus into an arrangement. Prickly business indeed. Such a gesture wasn't as delightful as the gift of fruitcake. It was customary to regale enemies or in-laws with such an illustrious gift. But a cactus certainly did suggest that one's company might have left a pleasanter memory than reality allowed. And as the floriferous forms of communication persisted, the social world danced through tapestries of surviving who said what, with strategically pruned daisies. These whispering wreaths themselves had a rhythm, a sort of floral Morse code known only to the initiated, or those who had the foresight to carry a flower dictionary in their reticule. Yes, some women could be found surreptitiously thumbing through pages like cartographers, navigating the sugar-spun maps of a sweet yet slightly thorny realm. Allow us mere mortal glimpses of this ephemeral exchange. If ever you wondered how those whose lives were corseted tighter than a high-waisted velvet bodice found relief, know it was partly in these blissful moments of petal-powered poetry. As we set these historical amusements gently into our imaginations, let us follow the echo of mystery that played out in parlors and garden walks. A chrysanthemum for friendship, a gardenia for secret love. Those were the lyrics sung through the fragrant air. In this floral ballet of hushes and undertones, one might find the gentle rustling of an evening's end, like the slow departure of sunlight that remarkably reflects one's own descent into sleep. Now, as you drift softly on the Victorian breeze, close your eyes to dream of an era where words were whispered upon blooms, where fragrant languages wrapped the senses in histories untold, where even the mildest of gestures held the power to bloom fable. Let the serenade of petals continue to soothe your thoughts as you glide on to tomorrow's tale. As the candle flames flicker like mellow dancers in the hushed silence of twilight, we reach the closing chapter of our dreamy voyage through the curious world of Victorian women's fancy dress obligations. It is here, with a soothing cadence and a wink of historical humor, that we examine the curious case of the ever-present parasol, an accessory as obligatory as tea and as varied as a posh accent. Picture a scene, if you will, beneath the doubtful English sky, forever on the brink of unleashing a capricious drizzle. It is into this setting that the Victorian woman steps, clad in yards of fabric draped more voluminously than logic might ever advise. With each swirl of silk and rustle of velveteen, she brandishes the parasol, not merely as a tool to shield from pretend sunshine, but as a marker of elegance, sophistication, and the quiet defiance of frizzy hair horrors. You see, whilst the modern veil of SPF-infused lotions and creams might suffice today, in the Victorian age, the parasol did the job splendidly. Neither perfunctory nor solely aesthetic, it was an essential element of the distinguished female ensemble, much like a delicate spoke in the wheel of polite society's rigmarole. With its painted silk, embroidered fringe, and sometimes even ingeniously hidden compartments. Perhaps for the odd love note, or a sugar lump purloined at afternoon tea, the parasol was as much a conversational icebreaker as any Regency riddle. Now one must ponder why, in a period where the stern British sun rarely bothered to exert itself, these mini canopies became such a rage. The truth is rather a straightforward tale of vanity and utility, two coquettish dance partners through history. Pale skin was all the rage, for a tanned complexion implied one might engage in outdoor pursuits, such as the working classes or adventurous sorts, who had the audacity to chase sunshine. Plump with enigmas and sheer fabric, parasols often bore the whims of fashion with astounding flexibility, tilting toward trends with the unpredictability of a novelist's pen. There were parasols engineered to snap shut with the authority of a governess gaze, and those open with the grace of music hall prima donnas, each meticulously chosen to match the day's outfit, akin to a die-hard game of sartorial chess. In this nocturne of nostalgia, let us not forget how the Victorian parasol embraced its role in the complex social semaphore. A coquettish tilt meant one thing, a dramatic twirl another. Communication, dear listener, weaving itself through the air, was subtle, silent, and always scandalously, a subtextual, Victorian emoji, if you will. The twilight years also brought about parasols reinforced for practical purposes, a welcome development, considering the whimsical whims of the British weather, and these sturdy little shelters played host too, to many a courtship under the sly glances of chaperones armed more daringly than a stern dowager with an unforgiving lorgnette. As we sip this final cup of Victorian absurdity, we realize that ultimately, the parasol was an emblem as much of its time as the grandiose fashions it accompanied, an emblem of societal constraint and artistic expression, quiet submission and sly resistance. Though the rains may tiptoe down upon our metaphorical memory lane, see how the parasol's delicate frame shields us from the mundane, inviting an evening instead, filled with whimsical reflections. And as we gently fold away this wind-blown chapter, much like the genteel denizens of yore folded their parasols when society demanded, may your dreams float softly across the night's canvas, the parasol spinning in this ever-fanciful dance of history. Let these musings be your lullaby, drawing the air around you into wisps of slumber. Sweet dreams.